Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Mercedes have revealed some insight into what their car, the W14, is going to look like for the 2023 season. They are seemingly not abandoning the no side pod design, and the car to the naked eye looks rather similar to this year's car, but the engineers say it's very different underneath. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. This is the comparison then between the remarkably different cars, the F175 and the W13 on the left compared to the right, and of course the Mercedes versus the Ferrari. The side pod designs radically different here, and this is one of the most striking features of this new design that Mercedes unleashed right at the start. Well, Bahrain testing, right? They had another version in back in February in Barcelona, but in Bahrain they unveiled the no side pod design, and people thought, wow, this is pretty incredible. How are they managing to house the engine package? How is the cooling going to work? And the cooling hasn't really been an issue for them this season, pretty impressively. But of course, in a theoretical world, if you have less car exposed, you should therefore have less drag. So turned out it was arguably the opposite, right? And the Mercedes was way more draggy than they thought it should be, and it was significantly down in a straight line. So what was causing that? That of course is the key question. But also, why were they struggling so much on some of the more bumpy tracks, and Monaco, Baku for example as well on their floor? Like, that was a question too. So yeah, radically different philosophies this year. The question was, a couple of months ago, will Mercedes copy Ferrari? Will they copy Red Bull? Or will they double down on their current concept? Because Hamilton was quite clear earlier this season that he doesn't want the engineers to be arrogant. He wants them to ensure that they make the best choice. If that means copying Red Bull and having a Red Bull imitation that's probably not quite as good, but maybe they can get there eventually, then, you know, he would prefer that than they double down on a design that is bad. But obviously they have good enough reason to believe that their concept can be the best concept and the fastest concept. They've just got to discover where that lies. And of course, also, if you do just copy the Red Bull, you're almost writing off next season, because Red Bull are so far ahead in the development of their own car. Then, you know, if you just copy their design, the imitation's never as good as the real deal, and you're going to be catching up performance forever. So it makes sense they double down on their concept, but they've got to be confident enough that this design philosophy can actually work. So this was a couple of months ago now, where George Russell says, you know, it's not off the table that we completely change philosophy with the car. But then not that long ago he that was then discussing that, yeah, they've got a new philosophy they're working towards, but they're very confident of their car being much better now. And it seems like now that is aligned with the zero pod, no side pod, whatever you want to call it, philosophy concept is going to remain. As George Russell says, I think that our problems do not really have anything to do with the philosophy of the side pods, going on to say the following. Or Toto Wolff says this: the last time I saw the new car, the W14, in the wind tunnel, it still looked exactly like the current one, but the engineers told me that it wasn't. So seemingly the changes, the innovations to the W14 over the W13 are largely kind of, well, not particularly visible to the naked eye. The car obviously will look different to a certain extent, but probably there will be elements that are very similar to the current car, and it might be the underside of the car, the floor of the car, from certain aspects or angles that we never really get to see unless the cars crash and have to get picked up by a crane, that where the differences really lie. And we expected, maybe coming into these new regulations, with Adrian Newey over at Red Bull and his experience and success in the past with ground effect cars where these regulations are, that Red Bull might nail the floor of the car in the Venturi tunnels more than other teams would. That's probably where they went wrong, Mercedes at least believe, and the rest of their car they reckon is actually okay if they make the floor better and maybe change a few other things around the car as well. This is another kind of angle of the Ferrari versus the Mercedes. So what do you guys think about this, right? Because Toto Wolff basically confirmed there, the car looks kind of like this again. I mean, the Mercedes, like, it looks like a fighter jet. It might be one of the best looking cars on the grid, in my opinion, up there with the Ferrari. The Ferrari's got to be number one. Look at that thing, it's absolutely stunning. But yeah, so they're going to stick with it, and they're going to hope that it works effectively next time. And they, of course, as they said there, the innovations aren't noticeable to when you just look at it straight on, but they are there, say the engineers. Similar thing, I think, to what Mercedes said a couple of months ago now, where they basically said, yes, our biggest upgrade coming in Austin, most of the changes won't be visible. So I think that's kind of what we saw. The Austin upgrade was definitely, well, gave them a big step in Mexico and Brazil, most certainly, and in Austin also to a certain extent. And it was, okay, a bit of front wing change, some other changes elsewhere, but mainly we believe on the floor, the underside of the floor, a few tweaks Mercedes did that made significant improvements to the performance of their car. And, you know, it's kind of the changes you can't see that make more difference on the W13 than some of the other changes. So we'll probably see a very similar looking W13 next year as the W14 that we now have. There are a few changes to the rules though. The floor, like the height has been raised, and also the wing mirrors are now way bigger. They're like twice as big next season. They actually look pretty massive. I'm sure over time we'll get used to seeing them big, because like the wheels this year are way bigger than last year. Now you look at older cars, you think, damn, the wheels were tiny, but really they weren't that tiny. Just they look small in comparison to this year's 18-inch wheels compared to the 13-inch wheels we've had in previous seasons. But yeah, the W14 might look rather like this, but of course I'm sure there will be changes, and Toto Wolff's not going to give much away with it. He's not going to say, oh yeah, it's looking like a bit of a rocket ship. Like, there's also other things I'm sure that they've got to consider. So intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comment section below. What do you guys expect? Is that a good idea for Mercedes to double down on this? The key to me really is, can they figure out what was causing their issues with the higher drag on the car? Because clearly that was affecting them at many races this season. It was probably what really affected them actually fighting for a win on a more regular basis, because any circuit they went to that had a long straight and it wasn't like at a higher altitude, they were really struggling. And yeah, Abu Dhabi was just one example at the end of the season to show that really they weren't as close as they needed to be to get a race win at most of the circuits on the calendar. And of course, you need to be good at every track if you want to try and win the championship. Quick comment here on Red Bull actually, because Verstappen was talking about Riccardo's return, and I just wonder what this means in light of the Perez kind of situation there as the second driver, let's just say, for Red Bull. Because as Verstappen says, I talked to him about it, it's also about feeling good somewhere, right, and getting his mojo back, Riccardo. At a certain point, that was no longer the case at McLaren. Instead of leaving Red Bull, he could have talked to the team about it, because there was the drama with, Riccardo leaving Red Bull, going to Renault, and then leaving Renault, going to McLaren. I don't think leaving Red Bull was necessarily an awful idea and decision from Riccardo, given, what can happen and does happen to Verstappen's teammates on a regular basis. But, probably the move to McLaren wasn't particularly wise from Danny Rick's perspective. But, he actually says Verstappen, it would have been better for Daniel if he stayed with Red Bull longer and basically never left. So, just wonder what that means, because obviously they haven't brought Riccardo in just because Perez has been a bit of a naughty boy. Well, he hasn't really been a naughty boy at all. But he said what he said after Brazil, and therefore there's, questions being raised. So yeah, just interesting to hear Verstappen's thoughts on Riccardo and the fact that, maybe a good teammate could be there in the future, right? Who knows what's going to happen this season? The Red Bull camp is definitely not out of the woods just yet. And even Hamilton had a comment on this the other day, saying the following on the Red Bull dramas. I mean, it feels like a bit of a Kardashian show happening here. It's pretty hilarious. Some of the stuff I've heard over the past few days have been so entertaining. I'm sure it'll all be on Netflix. It's going to be great. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure that is true. The Verstappen-Perez drama will be all over Drive to Survive, and Hamilton finds it pretty entertaining and probably thinks, yeah, you know what, a bit of chaos behind the scenes at Red Bull is going to be a good thing to help Mercedes and Ferrari come forward, because Verstappen is not like he's a one-man army. Perez has been very helpful to Verstappen's title challenges over the last couple of seasons, but in a world where Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes all have an equal car, Verstappen's life does become significantly more difficult, especially if he can't quite rely on Perez to back him up now, as maybe he has done in the past couple of seasons. And just to close out with this, I thought it was quite interesting to look at the most Driver of the Day awards in 2022. So Danny Rick, Nick De Vries, Carlos Sainz and Mick Schumacher, they all had one Driver of the Day award each. Vettel had 3, Hamilton had 3, Perez had 3, Leclerc 4 and Verstappen 5. So yeah, no George Russell here I thought was kind of interesting because he won a race, but yeah, maybe he wasn't the fans' best friend this season. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.